We are so happy you made it this morning. And for those tuning in, yes, I know it's not just a special day because it's my birthday, but because we get to come together and worship. So we invite you to stand and join us. Oh, you are God, and we lift you up. We keep singing, keep praising. We won't stop giving all we got, 'cause you're worthy of all glory. And oh, there is no one We declare today,
You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes.
was borrowed for 3 days. His body there would not remain. Our God has robbed the grave. Our God has robbed the grave. Hallelujah. That's the good news of the Lord. So we declare your name. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. Your name is victory. All praise will rise to Christ our King. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. Come on. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. By your Spirit I will rise from the ashes of defeat. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. In your name I come alive to declare your victory. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. The resurrected King is resurrecting Amen, amen.
You may be seated.
Humanity has endured every environment the world has to offer and has adapted, innovated, and overcome. And still, to this day, it struggles to understand its most complex challenge: people. This species can propel itself to the moon and back, yet fail even the most basic of social cues, transforming into abominations of themselves, such as the close talker,
Like my Instagram post yet. Why haven't you liked it yet? Can you go ahead and...
the office leech,
Hey, what's going on? Nothing? Cool. Dude, CrossFit this morning, totally bonkers. You been working out? Good talk.
and the dreaded bathroom conversationalist.
Bro, I like those shoes. Hey, do you have some chapstick I can borrow?
But there is hope, because we all struggle navigating the difficulties of relationships. Friendships are good, but we need people skills to make them great.
Good morning. Welcome to Encounter Church. So yesterday I was in the bedroom. We were packing for a trip that we were going on, and kind of as a parent, heard the tone in the living room start to shift. It was like the tone where, you know, like they've both reached their threshold and they no longer like each other. And it's like the smallest thing is going to kind of detonate the whole living room. So I hear my son, who's kind of like the canary, and so I go in there and I'm like, hey, buddy, because he's 3, and I'm like, what's going on? And, you know, and Ella's kind of over on the couch, and he's like, she won't disobey with me. And I'm like, what? I'm like, buddy, what time out? Like, why are you upset again? I want Ella to disobey with me, and she won't. she won't do it. And I'm like, oh, you mean like mommy and daddy had told you to do something and Ella is listening to mommy and daddy and you want her to not listen to mommy and daddy? Is that what you mean? And he was like, yeah. And like on the surface, I was like, wow, I really appreciate your honesty. And on the other hand, I was like, you're literally trying to lead my daughter into a coup. I don't know what to do with this, right? I mean, he's just like so honest. Like, yes, that's exactly what I want. And I'm like, you are 3 years old, dude. Like, this should not be something we're starting now. Like, you're trying to be a negative influence on your 10-year-old sister already. This is horrible. But I think one of the things I love about parenting this season is because of the people component of it. Like, I love people. I think people are fascinating. Like, I think we are so interesting. And every person has a story, and if you're willing to sit down and dig into it, it's usually a very compelling story, like an amazing story, and full extremes too, right? Like the good and the bad. Like I've read an article just recently about how there are a group of people who have really started to make a living off the tendency of kids saying words like poop and pee to smart devices. Like that I see it with my 3-year-old. His favorite word is toot and poop. And like no joke, I was reading an article, there are people who write songs about poop and toot and pee because they know 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and 35-year-old men are standing around Alexa and Siri, and they're saying those words. And lo and behold, Alexa and Siri actually trigger the songs to be played titled that. And this guy was like, yeah, I've made about $10,000 just on my poop song alone. And I'm like people, like so fascinating. But I think the age group that I'm in the middle of parenting right now is the best potential group to study to understand people. Like I feel like you get the best and the worst, right? Like I want her to disobey with me. Like you just get the brutal honesty. And one of the ways that like my son really gives me a glimpse of human beings is at bedtime, right? I'm sure that like if our kids could ever be conscripted by foreign adversaries, like bedtime would be the time to get national secrets out of government agents, because something inside of you by the end of the day, you're about ready to break, right? And it's like somehow they know it and they're not even close to breaking. And so one of the things that will happen, we put him down and we will hear through the monitor and through the walls with his very, very loud voice for such a tiny being, Mommy, Daddy, because he doesn't want to go to bed. Like the party's still going on. He knows the party's going on. Like we're out there and we're having fun and he's not a part of it. And so we will watch him like literally walk through a whole toolkit of trying to get us to come in the room. He'll try to coerce us. Like, I've got a pee-pee, because he knows that, like, we're respondent to anything that's bathroom related, because we're really trying to foster that in his life, right? So he'll coerce us, manipulate us. Like, he'll convince us, like, I love you, I just want to see you. I mean, you'll literally hear him screaming, like, Mommy, I need to pee-pee. And then he'll be like, Mommy, I love you. I just want to see your face, right? And then like guilt, conviction, like, get in here now. You don't love me, right? Like, I mean, it is crazy. And it's all within the span of about 90 seconds that he's working through these things. And all of it, it's like for the goal of controlling us. Like you'll check, yes, buddy. I just need a sip of water. Okay, here's a sip of water. Actually, I need a sip of cold ice water. And I'm like, no. Like, H2O is all you're getting, okay? And he's like, but wait. Daddy, yes. I love you. Oh. Daddy, will you please stay in here and just sit with me and be trapped forever in the room till I decide to fall? I mean, it's just like, it's crazy. But what this lines up with, what actually one of my mentors calls, is the C4 approach to like relationships. Right? And this is something that I've never sat him down with this presentation and be like, son, here's the key to really ruining a bedtime every single night for mom and dad, all right? I want you to coerce us, convince us, convict us, and control us, okay? That's like I've never had to. He intuitively got that. He just understood. And like its namesake, this is oftentimes what happens when this method is employed in relationships. It blows up. And the reason I love toddlers or my son, which we kind of lovingly refer to as a three-nager because he's 3, but he's also a teenager, hence the old like disobey with me, is that like they grow up into adults who have toddler tendencies too. Right? We've all worked with adults, and we know that like adults are just toddlers who figured out how to like put on big boy clothes and big girl clothes. Because we have a tendency to do the exact same thing relationally. And that if we're going to be people who are actually going to master life, who are going to step into the life that I believe is full and abundant and the one that God created us for, then it really does start with mastering people skills. It's the only skill that'll never be outsourced, right? When you think about the last 50 years, there's jobs that 50 years ago people had that they thought, man, being a switchboard operator on the telephone is always going to be in demand because people want to talk to each other. Like, that's not a job anymore. And there's jobs like that. There used to be people who would go and set the pins when people would bowl, and they would knock them down. And then they would come out and they would reset the pins so that people could bowl again. Like, that's not a job anymore. And there is such a push to artificial intelligence and to robots. There are Amazon warehouses that are filled with nothing but robots grabbing things off a shelf and boxing them. Like, it is a move to replace us. I mean, all of us have walked into restaurants and wondered where people are and see the machines. And you're just ordering on that. Because we tend to push towards those things. But the one skill that cannot, the one aspect of that we can never delegate, that we can never roboticize and turn into artificial intelligence is people skills. And the quality of our relationships affects the quality of our lives. This is why people skills matter, because it's not just about job security. It's about the quality of our lives. You and I both know this. It doesn't matter how good things are going at work. If relationships are home, it's struggling, life is struggling. And if work isn't going that great, but home is solid, the relationships with your best friends are solid, you can navigate it. And this is what it means to be human. And most of us, we were born into the world knowing how to take the C4 approach. But we kind of stumble into the other ways. And this month, what I want to do is look at the people skills. And so this is actually one of the videos that my wife was looking at this past weekend. We were watching videos about Nibbles, my hamster who passed away, R.I.P. Nibbles, R.I.P. And we stumbled across this video, which was when we bought Nibbles, and Ella walked up to the fish tank, and we noticed that at first it was like, no, these fish can't be swimming towards her. So we were like, Ella, go to the other side. And lo and behold, as she went to the other side, the fish started like swimming to her again. And I'm like, no, like the scientist in me is like, Ella, go to the other side because this cannot be because of you. And it's like we sat there for, this is only a portion of the video in our time, but she went over there and like literally you could see the fish going back and forth to her. And the realization was like, man, what if there was a way we could have this type of influence with people instead of the C4 approach? Instead of blowing up our relationships, what if there was a way of doing relationships that actually attracted people to us? That actually affected the lives of people in our lives for the good and for the better. And those people skills are what we want to talk about through the course of this month. And in some ways, when I saw that video and this like family nostalgic moment that was happening, because we have a household of people who love nostalgia, and we have phones who love serving us memories that serve as clickbait, right? Where you just kind of find yourself lost in these like albums for hours. And seeing that video, I was like, man, that is a perfect video of what it would have been like to be around Jesus. Like if you've ever studied the life of Jesus, even if you're here today and you're not even sure you believe like the whole Jesus is God thing, that historically it's beyond even a reasonable doubt. Like there's no even like iota of legitimate like research doubt that you can have that Jesus was an actual person. Because there's more written about him, there's more documented about him. Like he was clearly a living, breathing individual who had a significant outsized influence on humanity. And one of the things that you start to notice when you read the biographical accounts of the life of Jesus, the four biographical accounts that we have in the Bible, it's really clear that people liked Jesus. Even the people who were not like Jesus liked Jesus, which is kind of an accomplishment because any of us can get people like us to like us. It's a whole different realm when people who are not like us start to like us. And Jesus had this effect. Kids would just run up to him. There was something about him. He was different. And in some ways, it's easy to see kind of the idea of Jesus and write it off and say, well, that's just this religious notion, or, okay, I believe he's God, so it's even more of a write-off because I can never be like him. But fortunately for us, Paul, who's one of the most prolific church starters, spreaders of Christianity, and writers in the New Testament, is speaking to a group of people in a city that was the perfect context to have this conversation. They're in the city of Philippi, which was the most kind of like Greco-Roman city of the day. Because the Greco-Roman culture was the defining culture of the first century that Christianity was spreading in. And it's nothing like the culture we live in today. And it's this backdrop of Philippi where the church actually starts to grow, and it's this amazing miracle within itself. And as it's starting to grow, Christianity is starting to bump up against the Greco-Roman culture and the people tendencies that existed within the Greco-Roman culture. Like this was a culture that did not value people. This was a culture that tended to have severe class structures and would just discard a life if it wasn't wanted or needed. And so Paul is writing to this church who's struggling with the tension of like who everyone else is around us is like and who we're supposed to be like. And then in the middle of this letter, he writes a sentence that I think can be profound. And I would even say it's the foundation for us to grow in our people skills. It's the starting point. And it's a starting point that Jesus embodied that you and I can embody too. And all throughout this series, the rest of this month, where we build on these people skills, all of them are going to be pointless if we don't get this foundational component that Paul gives us an insight to. If you have the Encounter Church app, or if you want to download the Encounter Church app at encounterchurch.com/app, you'll know in the message notes I've already loaded the passage we're going to look at today. But Paul writes these words. He says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. This is the simple sentence that he writes. You can kind of, different versions translate this word that Paul writes different ways, the same attitude. You may have seen it like that if you've ever studied this passage. But this, I think, is the foundational starting point for people skills. Paul is saying, hey, look, you guys are kind of living in a world where people skills, the people skills that people have are actually in direct contradiction to the life that you're meant to live. And so I want to help you get there. Because Paul understands what's true of them is true about you and me too. That we have a default. And the default that you have when it comes to relationships is the same default I have. It's what we caught or what we were taught when we were little and what we grew up in. Right? If you've been married for a while, you have moments where you realize you're like, oh my goodness, that was my father. Oh my goodness, that's totally my mother-in-law. Because if you weren't intentional about it, you just tend to replicate what you saw. And Paul understands we all have a default. And we don't question the default. We don't look at the default. We can live our lives and just keep practicing the C4 method without even questioning it. And he says, hey, here's the starting point of building a new default. It's the mindset, the same attitude, as Jesus. And fortunately for us, he writes this sentence after he's been building up to that statement. So what does it look like to have the same attitude, the same mindset as Jesus? Well, at the beginning of this passage, he says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. That's a starting point. Now, what I love about studying the Bible, for anyone who's gone through the 112, who's taken the course where I actually teach you how to read the Bible, one of the things that we talk about a lot is that the Bible was originally, while it is for us, it was not letters that were written to us. It was written originally to a group of people in a defined time, in a defined place, who were going through a defined series of issues, circumstances, or problems. So when Paul writes, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, it is because this is the default of the Greco-Roman culture. It is the water they are swimming in. Selfish ambition, vain conceit, that's what surrounds them. Philippi was a place of extreme arrogance and pride. They had a unique position in the Roman Empire as a city that we won't get into, but they had a very unique opportunity. To be a citizen of Philippi meant you walked with a swagger. You held your head up high because you had something that other cities in the Roman Empire didn't have. You had a special kind of freedom. And so they walked with this, and this ambition, this kind of vain conceit, this self-absorbedness was present and just the water of the day. And Paul's starting point is like, hey, one of the first things that you're going to have to do is unlearn some things. Unpractice some things. Like before I can build on to this new, we've got to demo the old. And the old is this tendency towards selfish ambition. I love that Paul actually writes this. This is a side note for anybody who's ever been called ambitious. He's not criticizing ambition. He's criticizing selfish ambition. There's a key difference there. What's fascinating is Paul writes this almost 2,000 years ago. And as someone who's obsessed with human beings, who thinks people are fascinating, I tend to read a lot, whether it's in the research of like psychology, sociology, anthropology. Like I enjoy that. I think humans are the most fascinating subjects on planet Earth. And one of the research, probably in the last 20 years that I think is the most profound, is a researcher out of University of Washington who essentially stumbles into Paul's declaration and realization about human beings 2,000 years after the fact. Is a guy named John Gottman. And John Gottman was famous for studying relationships. And he would bring couples into his laboratory, and he would watch them, observe them, and kind of document. He would do surveys. And kind of out of all of this research, he started to notice patterns. And he actually noticed a series of 4 things that were incredibly destructive to relationships that are all growing out of the soil of what Paul is saying. So this is the genius of the Bible, is that it's written almost 2,000 years ago, and yet Paul has an understanding about human beings that takes researchers, like with laboratories and laboratory assistants and experimentation, to stumble into. What Gottman basically discovered in these 4 different components is one of the kind of destructive elements of relationship is what you would call criticism. And criticism is not like a complaint. It's not it's like the complaint component is okay. Where it takes a negative turn in criticism, you can see it in the sample statement. You always talk about yourself. That's a complaint. The turn is you're so self-centered. That's where it becomes this criticism. You take this moment, you take this action, and you turn it into a character assassination. Like you go from you're always late to you must be lazy. You're taking this thing and you're turning it into a character trait. Right? That you don't listen, you don't care. See the turn? And Gottman notices that, and he labels it criticism. And this criticism is one of the 4. And then another one is defensiveness. And defensiveness is one of those ones that when, let's say, hey, can you pick up some milk on the way home? And you walk in, it's like, and you respond, I was just too busy today. You know how busy my schedule is. Why didn't you just do it? Now, the reality is that there was a recipe that required milk for dinner for everyone to eat, and that's not happening because you didn't bring the milk. And instead of walking in and owning it and saying, oh, goodness, I'm so sorry, you're absolutely right, completely forgot. Right? I mean, this is my life. I mean, unless I have multiple reminders and something physically like wrapped around my wrist and written on my hand, I will forget something on the way home because my brain is just like still processing the day. And I know this will happen, and the first thing I have to do is just own it. Like, you are absolutely right. I completely forgot again. But this one is like, you throw up a shield. We do this a lot when we apologize. It's a very subtle thing. We'll say, I'm sorry that offended you. Which is not an apology. It's defensive. Because in the subtlety of it, you're saying, well, you're the problem. Like, what I did wasn't wrong, but I'm sorry that offended you. I'm sorry that hurt your feelings. Where a true apology owns the action, not the reaction. Right? But this is another method of defensiveness. And we all know people in our lives who do that, and we do that too. And Gottman noticed there was this other one that kind of builds over time, stonewalling. And that's the one that can non-verbally and verbally manifest, right? It's this again. It's the whatever. Or we talked about this last week. It's a dismissive. It's not just a defensive. At least in defensiveness, you engage. In stonewalling, you completely dismiss. And at that point, you can't even have a conversation anymore. You can't even solve a problem. You've got a fire in the room, and no one's willing to pick up the fire extinguisher. So, well, whatever. Flip to my phone, turn on the television. Stonewalling can look like just walking in the house, not really acknowledging it, going to the video game, and ignoring what's going on around you. This one's a little trickier, but we do it. But there was the fourth one, and it's the fourth one that was the most interesting of them all, and it was contempt. A sample statement that would come out of like the research would be like, you're tired? Cry me a river. Like, okay, Justin Timberlake. I've been with the kids all day, and all you do when you come home is play those idiotic video games. I don't have time to deal with another kid. Could you be any more pathetic? Like, all of us knows how awkward this moment is when you're sitting with someone and this plays out. This is the moment you're like, oh, I got a phone call, I gotta go, right? Because you're like, whew, man, like it just turns fast. Now, to be clear, I am not defending the individual who's coming home and playing the video games. Like, that is a legitimate complaint, right? Like, I've been dealing with your crazy offspring that you contribute 50% of your DNA to. And this is not only my job, it's your job too. We are a team together, right? So that's valid. Where it turns, though, is it starts to get condescending. Right? I don't have time to deal with another child. You're pathetic. This contempt of all four is the absolute worst. Because it's this elevation. Right? Remember Paul? Paul has this brilliant vain conceit, selfish ambition, this idea that I'm better than you. And this is at the core of contempt. It's like, you are beneath me. And it is incredibly destructive. In fact, there was a research project done that showed that couples who dealt with contempt regularly in their relationship tended to be sicker more often. Because contempt is such an ever-present, consequential thing to a relationship that it provides low-grade stress that's always there that leads to the immune system being weakened. So if you have contempt in your relationship at work, contempt in your relationship at home, it physically affects your body, not just your emotions. Like, it's profound. They've been able to document that couples with contempt present in their relationship are sicker more often. It's also one of the things that's behind why they noticed the eye roll. One of the things that Gottman started to notice because he would actually watch couples is that the eye roll correlated to higher chances of divorce. And a couple different reasons, but an eye roll, because I'm currently the academic professor in Eye Roll Academy in my own house. So that's kind of part of my, resume I'm quite proud of. I opened this school when my daughter turned 10 because something happened to her body where her eyes just started to roll randomly without me knowing, but without her knowing too. Like I would be like, Ella, let's replay what just happened here. And she's like, what are you talking about? I was like, I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to hit the rewind button. Like, I want you to walk back to the couch. And this time, I'm going to say exactly what I said, and your eyes are going to stay still. And she's like, what are you talking about, Dad? I'm like, Ella, your eyes just did like this like F1 like racing series thing. Like it just went all the way around really fast. She's like, no, it didn't. I'm like, yes, it did. And we've gone back and forth over this. Finally, I said, hey, Ella, I'm opening up Eye Roll Academy, and I'm going to educate you on the eye roll that you keep doing that you're not even like aware of. And this is why the eye roll actually, one of the things that they realize that can correlate to divorce is because one side of the relationship knows contempt is present and the other side doesn't realize that they're showing it. And so this actually slowly erodes the relationship and it becomes this vicious cycle. And if you're being treated with contempt, what happens? If you're given the eye roll, what happens? You start to build a wall. Because it hurts. It's frustrating. If you've ever been you don't have to know the person. It's not a relational thing. If I'm in a gas station and they roll their eyes at me, I'm like, you better be glad I got to go somewhere because you just fired me. You get mad when someone rolls their eye because you feel it. You feel contempt. And ultimately what came out of this was that he realized that contempt is the greatest predictor of divorce. And as he kind of began to dig in deeper, what he labeled the four horsemen, they discovered was responsible, right? This is crazy. 93% success rate in predicting couples would have a divorce within 5 years when those were present. Those four things, present in a relationship, 9 out of the 10 couples, they were able to kind of get as a harbinger of what would happen. And this is incredibly insightful because contempt is not just romantic relationships. I would argue that in all the uncivilness in our country right now, contempt is more present today in news feeds, and comment sections. I mean, part of civility was that you could disagree without demonizing. And I don't even like to watch the yellow journalism that we call news today because it's opinion news. And the core emotional driver is contempt. It's like, they're idiots. How could they ever think this? And there's something dangerous. Even if you strongly disagree with something. Gottman's research and Paul's insight 2,000 years ago tells us that contempt kills relationships. And it's hard to bring back a relationship where contempt has crept in. And this number is a terrifying number. And Paul knew this. And so one of the things that I have for you, if you don't subscribe to our email, is because I know that's really fascinating research. And some of you are like, okay, can you please tell me more about those four horsemen? Or can you tell me what we do with those four horsemen? And yes, I'd love to do that. I want to give you a PDF that's just a really simple summary of Gottman's research that also has the 4 antidotes to those 4 horsemen, because chances are you probably saw one of those in a relationship present in your life right now, and you're like, okay, how do I lean into this? So this week in our email that we're going to send out, I'm actually going to send out the PDF with it. So if you don't get our emails or you don't read our emails, this is the time to do that. If you don't get our email, you can actually get it at encounterchurch.com/email. This will allow you to kind of get that PDF when it comes. The genius, however, for this people skills was what Paul says after this. So Paul's saying, let's remove this, and then he pivots to the point he's trying to make that is at the core of this attitude, this mindset that Jesus has. He says, rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of the other. He finally lands on the statement that he's going to use to then quantify and label with the mindset and the attitude of Jesus. And it's this humility. And here's the thing you should know. I've talked a lot, there's Greco-Roman culture, because I wanted you to realize that Greco-Roman culture did not view humility the way we view humility. We use humility as a compliment, right? When you meet someone and they're humble, you're like, man, they were humble. But in the Greco-Roman world, if you were humble, it was a weakness. It was not a strength of your character. It was a reflection of your weakness, of your frailty. And what was fascinating is that we value humility today in the Western world because of Christianity. Humility was a distinct Christian virtue. In fact, Paul writes a word in the original language of the day that we read and translate as humility. It's a compound word that he puts together, and it's a compound word that you don't find in the Greek writing of the day. Paul introduces this new way of thinking about this word, this idea of humility. And why? Because humility was at the core of Christianity. And so Paul says, hey, we're going to, rather doing what everyone else is doing, I want you to practice humility. And humility is not this like false modesty. It's not I'm not as good as you. Like that's a false humility. Humility is not even trying to they're going to be more valuable than I am. Paul's not calling them to take a different estimation. We're like, oh, if you think you're like a grade A, well, maybe you're a grade C and they're grade A. Like it's not a decreasing of your value. What he's actually doing is he's calling them to make a choice. The default, one that we don't struggle with, is self-preservation. The default is our own interest and our own needs and our own desires. Humility is not about devaluing ourselves. It's about choosing to elevate the cares of others. And that intentional choice is what he's calling them to in this. He builds on it. He says, not looking to your own interest, that's the default, but each of you to the interest of others, of intentionally being aware of what other people need, being aware of where other people are in life and what they're walking through. And there's something really attractive about that. When you have a conversation with someone and you feel listened to and they ask you questions and you get to talk about yourself and what you're walking through, like it's amazing. Just talking about your problems makes you feel better. You ever notice that? It's just the weirdest thing in the world to me. Like it was one of those things that when I say when I became a human, but like when I became an adult and I would start to notice especially in my world when people would talk about problems and then they'd be like, oh, thanks so much for that. And then they would walk away and inside, just to be real, I love solving problems. I like fixing problems. I'm like, oh, let's completely dismantle that and rebuild it. That's what brings me joy. And then I don't even get to do it. And they just vented and then they walk away and they're like, thanks so much. I feel so much better. And as they walk away and they feel lighter, in my head, I'm screaming at them, but you still have your problem. We didn't fix your problem. What is wrong? We can fix it. And they're like, oh, that just felt so good. But we've all experienced that. That when just on the other side of someone who listens, who cares, who leans into our burdens, or celebrates our accomplishments, it does something. And this is what Paul is inviting them into. And at the core of it is this humility. the core of it is what Christianity was meant to reflect to the world, because there was a lot more at stake. I think that we are primed as people who follow Jesus. If you're a Christ follower, we are primed to make a significant difference in this season of our nation. Because it is impossible to have civility without humility. And one of the reasons we see the breakdown of civility is because there is a breakdown in humility. And there's a breakdown of people skills that go with that. And yet it's at the core of who we are as Christians. It's at the very essence of what it means to practice Christianity. In some ways, we have a capacity to show the world something that's truly extraordinary, and as we practice this people skill. And here's what I think. I think the world is actually hungry for it more than ever before. Now, one of the things you may not know about me is I did some graduate work at doctoral level, and part of the research that I did was in corporations, and a handful of corporations specifically. I studied their history and how they built their organizational culture, how they developed training. And so that's kind of like the lane that I dug deep into. And one of them specifically that I did a lot of research around was Walt Disney and the early years of Disneyland. Okay, so I know you never want to go to Disney with me because it's boring, because I know way too much about Walt Disney and Disney. But one of the things that many people don't realize, if you've ever been to Disney World, is Epcot was not exactly, it didn't turn out the way Walt wanted it to be. As Walt passed away 2 years before, he passed away before Walt Disney World was complete. But the title of the whole expansion project was called Project X. And there was a lot of like land purchases and a lot of shell companies. But Walt, I think about 2 months before he passed away, he recorded a video that was delivered to Florida legislators that stayed hidden for a long time. And then as the years have gone by, the archives kind of unfolded, and Walt's video kind of crept out. And this is actually kind of a picture of it. And Walt, when he walks through the Project X to the Florida legislators, because Florida had to make a lot of concessions in order to do this thing that he was trying to do at the scale he was trying to do at it. We take it for granted today if you've ever been to Walt Disney World, but the scale and the size and the scope, the thing is twice the size of Manhattan. Okay, this is massive, what he was trying to do at that day. But when Walt's talking about it, what excited him was not replicating Disneyland at a grander scale. Where he got passionate in the video was when he got to Epcot. Because this was going to be the experimental prototype of the city of tomorrow. Hence the word Epcot. This was what was going to, he had this idea that he could create a city that looked like this, that crazily was going to be covered by a dome, that made the environment perfect. And the only way you would move around inside of this experimental prototype of the city of tomorrow was a monorail and a people mover. And that he wanted the city to kind of capture the amazingness of humanity and the world. And so you would walk through cities, and they were going to build city streets that it would feel like you're in Paris, and then you would turn and you feel like you're in London, and then you'd feel like you're in Monaco. Like you would have this global experience just walking on the streets, which sounds a little familiar, doesn't it, if you've ever been to Epcot? That's where that whole gallery came from. But Epcot was never meant to be a theme park. It was meant to be a city that Walt wanted to build to show humanity what was possible. People would live there in these high-rises, and they would come in through this underground, I mean, it was the Big Dig before the Big Dig. They would come into the city, and they would kind of pop up and get on the escalator, people movers, and monorails, and travel around, and they would do life here. And Walt, in his pitch to the Florida legislators saying, hey, this is why you should let me do it, is because this is what, once I prove its success in Orlando, which he picked because it was dead center of the state, and he envisioned the state would just all around would come to this place. He's like, once people get a glimpse, they're going to beg me to do this in their cities too. And Walt thought he could do this all around the United States. This was what Epcot originally was. This incredible experimental city that was going to show humanity what was possible. And it never came to be. But Walt did not stumble into this idea. He didn't originate this idea of a people that showed the possibility. The original inventor of that was Jesus. Jesus, when he assembles this group of people and conveyed this whole different way of living, the dream wasn't just a life transformation. It was that the community that would be formed out of those individuals' lives being transformed and marked by grace would actually start to create a community that the world would notice was different. The grace they had towards each other, the humility they had towards one another, the way that they would willingly share and give. That was what the church was meant to be. That's why, as a church, we practice generosity. It's because we're able to help people. We take all this for granted. We're able to help families or help individuals walking through hard times. Why? Because someone over here gives money to the church so the church can give money to them. No strings attached, just to help them. Because why? Our lives have been transformed. God was so generous to us, so we're going to do it other. It's just this completely different picture of what the people and the potential of humanity could look like through Jesus in us. And this is ultimately why Paul was so passionate about unpacking people skills to them, because he realized in Philippi, the city that was the very quintessential essence of Greco-Roman culture in the day, it was to that community that they were going to show a better way of life that left people better because of it. And I think that as Christians, in the next 2 or 3 years, we have an opportunity to shine in ways that perhaps maybe you and I had never have been able to do in our entire lifespan. Where humility, the attitude of Jesus, could mark us. And that Paul finishes with this, right? Have that same mindset, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. That is who we follow, if you follow Christ. That was his attitude and action. That he chose to condescend to earth, and never once ever treated the people he interacted with condescension. That in some ways, like I said, watching my daughter that day at PetSmart, I got a glimpse of what it was supposed to look like when Jesus shows up in my relationships around the people who are around me, that they should be drawn. Not necessarily to me or necessarily to you, but him inside of us, being manifested with humility, with grace, with kindness, with forgiveness, and that it would be a contagious thing that literally people would flock to. Asking the question, how do I get more of what's inside of you? And by doing that, this is what I think, by leaning into this series, this image can be a picture of what it looks like for us in our own lives to practice people skills. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you. Thank you for your grace and mercy and your love. That really the foundation of all of this is how you love, of how you give, of your willingness to step into our circumstances and situations and pay for the price and the penalty of the things that we did, that you covered the bill through the cross. And I pray, Dad, that you would create within us just a contagious, infectious, burning desire to be people who are known for the people skills that we have. And that we would, as a group of people, seeking to lean into and follow you, would embrace your mindset, embrace your attitude of humility in our interactions with others. And may, in our humility, may that begin to create a contagious movement where people see what love and grace look like in the course of everyday lives and relationships. And thank you for the fact that you care about the quality of our relationships and the quality of our lives. And it's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. I want to say thank you for being here today. And one of the things we want to wrap up today, because I think the core of who he was how he loved. And if you and I are going to be those type of people, then we have to start with that foundation of how he loved. So we want to wrap up with a song today that's just a kind of a reflection on how he loves. Because the more we reflect on how he loves, the better we are going to be at loving others. And the better we are at loving others, I sincerely believe our people skills increase, the quality of our relationships increase, and the quality of our lives increase with it. And so I want to invite you to stand. And as we close out and respond to this song called How He Loves. Let's sing.
He is jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I'm unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory, and I realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me. Oh, how he loves us so. Oh, how he loves us. How he loves us so. He is jealous for me. Love's like a hurricane. I am a tree bending beneath the weight of his wind and mercy. When all of a sudden I'm unaware of these afflictions eclipsed by glory, and I realize just how beautiful you are and how great your affections are for me. And oh, how he loves us. Oh, how he loves us. How he loves us. He first loved us so we can love one another. So we sing that he loved us. Oh, how he loved us. Oh, how he loved us. Oh, how he loved us. He loves us. Oh,
just the way you are. He can't help it. It's not about what you've done. It's not about your behavior. He just loves you because you are you, and he can't help it. And it's that we are supposed to take to other people, just as Chris talked about today. And that's how you draw other people to you, is through that humility and through that love. We're so excited you joined us today. A couple things. We have a gift for you if this is your first time. We have a coffee mug, and we have this awesome little bag of coffee that has a little QR code that you can scan and learn more about the church. And this website is constantly being updated. And you get both. It's not like one or the other. Like my kids are like, I can have both? You can have both, the coffee and the mug. Next Sunday night, we're kicking off our student ministry. That's for anyone grades 6 through 12. And that doesn't have to be somebody who comes to the church regularly. Everyone is welcome. The only requirement is that you are in 6th grade through 12th grade, and we would love to have you. It starts at 6 o'clock, goes to 7:30 every Sunday. We eat, we have fun, we have a lesson, we have small group time. I promise that your students or anyone that age will walk away loving it. Chris would love to meet you if this is your first time. If you want to stop by and say hi, he'll be out by Starting Point, the glass doors by the front door. And again, he has his gift for you. We hope you have an awesome week, an awesome day off tomorrow, and look forward to seeing you back next Sunday as we continue our series, People Skills. God bless and take care.